Good day, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Adapting the Downturn, a process approach to cutting costs and focusing on value webcast. My name is Lauren, and I'll be your operator for today. At this time, all participants are in listen-only mode. We will conduct a question-and-answer session towards the end of this conference, at which time you may press star 1 for questions. If at any time during the call you require assistance with the web or audio content, please press star 0 and an operator will be happy to assist you. As a reminder, this conference is being recorded for replay purposes. I'd now like to turn the presentation over to your host for today's call, Mr. Andrew Graham, President and CEO of Technotrego.
Thank you very much. Well, I would like to begin by thanking everyone for taking time out from their busy schedules to join us on this webinar today. I hope the next period proves to be stimulating and informative for us all. And if we can just move to the first slide, please. It's been proven time and time again that clear thinking before we take action often means the difference between success or failure during the implementation phase. Everything we do at Technotrego is based on that premise. The temptation to jump to action, especially during times of turbulence and pressure, is strong. However, often the results turn out to be less than expected and in some cases disastrous. During our 51 years in operation, we've been fortunate to support many of the world's leading organizations, helping them by using targeted, specific processes to analyze their businesses and identify the priority areas where action needs to be taken. The time spent up front in that analysis pays dividends down the line during the execution phase. And here at Technotrego, we've developed a unique combination of tools and experience to facilitate that journey from analysis through to implementation. Slide. In a more normal business climate, the company spends its time supporting clients with skill development activities to implement rational process ideas, together with a range of consulting applications which take these process ideas and apply them to specific business issues. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. In recent months, it would have been impossible not to have noticed there's been a significant economic downturn triggered by the subprime mortgage crisis in the USA. This has rapidly spread around the globe, and at this point there is virtually no market sector or geography which has not been affected to some extent. It's now clear that while the various countries are at different stages in this economic recession, they're all moving along a similar path. And the next 2 years, maybe more, it's going to prove challenging for us all in different ways. For some organizations, it will mean a reduction in their sales book order value. For others, it may mean escalating raw material costs. For many businesses, there will be increasing difficulty to access capital, maintain cash flow, or retain your critical resources. The challenges are legion, and each challenge will require a specific approach for it to be navigated successfully. However, within those challenges, there's also opportunities, and whilst we work to restructure the businesses and preserve them during the bad times, we also need to be mindful of coming out on the other side and being in a good position to grow. So in some cases, the organization is going to have a clear view of what needs to be done to meet both the short-term business imperative, namely to remain viable, whilst continuing to position itself for success when the economy picks up and strengthens. For others, the course is less clear, and as you listen to the presentation today, you may reflect on your organization's situation and determine the clarity of what needs to be done and how you would go about making these changes. It's quite possible that at this point, you may not be sure which options will be the most effective, and the first place to start here would be to develop an effective roadmap. It's my intention that today's webinar will help you explore these questions. Slide. So to illustrate this a little further, you may consider the following table, which shows the different approaches required for different issues. The structural issues in most organizations, which you can see in one of the columns, are the product of the strategy being pursued. They typically trigger decisions around what range of products or services will be offered to which markets. What is the growth mechanism of the organization? What's the competitive environment in which this business must operate? Answering these questions often becomes the driver behind the breadth and scope of the operation in terms of what geographies or markets are covered, which offices require to be maintained in which geographies, and what's the organization's capability profile. The majority of these decisions generally result in fixed costs being added to the business. On the other hand, in the next column you see operational issues, and they tend by nature to be variable. The volume of products or services being provided, for example, the number of development projects in progress, and hence, oftentimes, the number of resources required in terms of assets, people, and the inevitable organisation structure that follows. From KT's perspective, we've got different approaches available to analyse these areas of the business. On the one hand, when the issue is known and understood, we can move straight into analysis. When the issue is not fully understood, we may need to make a more triage-based approach, which effectively appraises the situation prior to moving to resolution. And you'll hear more about this in the following presentation. Slide, please. So the objective of the webinar is to give you an overview of some of these issues and a possible approach to take when dealing with them. It's also to show how our systematic approach towards decision-making and problem-solving will yield significant results and, in fact, save time down the track. We all know the old adage that says, do it right first time. But the truth is that in the heat of the moment, it's often easy to overlook the thinking and preparation required to make sure that we're doing the right things well. A weakness in this area will often result in the organisation having to do things over and over again, and at that stage, the cost and time spent will escalate exponentially. Finally, to give you some examples drawn from our industry expertise built up over the years, and propose to you that well-developed applications coupled with a collaborative, results-driven approach will yield amazing results during these challenging times. So at this point, I'd like to hand the presentation over to my colleague, Brian Schramke. Brian is a senior consultant with Kepner-Trigo based in the US and has developed considerable experience working on a range of activities in the area of project facilitation, organizational culture change, and business process improvements. This work has taken Brian into a wide variety of our clients in both the US and other global markets. And so today, Brian will be walking us through some of the slides that follow and giving our thoughts. So once again, I'd like to say thank you for being with us today, and to Brian. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrew. This is Brian. I appreciate the introduction, and I appreciate all of you around the world joining our webinar this morning, so and this afternoon and this evening. What my intention is, and where I plan to take us through this next half hour, is essentially to make a case for why it's important to employ a process and to explain our approach for making sure that how organizations react to the current conditions they're facing is in their best interest. And as mentioned earlier, we will open this up for questions at the end. And also I will have on the line practice representatives from some of our other practices who may be able to address perhaps your specific industry or business situation needs. In terms of what organizations are faced with, it's not too difficult to find some of the doom and gloom that's out there. And the fact that this economic condition and the things that are happening to you are in fact happening doesn't mean that companies cannot react and actually prosper in such an environment. It's interesting, the title of that we chose was a process approach to cutting costs and focusing on value, and I'm quite certain that many of you were attracted to the cutting cost aspect, and that's certainly in many cases an appropriate response and a necessary response. One of the objectives that I have for this is to elevate your perspective to recognize not only is cutting costs not the only lever that can be pulled, but there are other levers that can actually help you prosper even in these down times. And on top of that, there are rational, logical ways and logical processes that can help you figure out what those appropriate responses are. Just to give you a sense for the kinds of opportunities we have already found in terms of helping organizations, I just want to give you kind of a sampling of the kinds of improvements we've been able to make with organizations around the world. And certainly on that list are some examples of the cost lever that one might pull. And we've been very successful in helping organizations eliminate waste and reduce costs in their organizations. But on the other side of the scale, there are also initiatives you will see up there and some of the results which are more focused on increasing the value and improving the revenues of the organization without a straight look at cost cutting. So it's important, again, to keep in mind that while cost cutting seems to be front and center, it's not the only step in the process. So some of the different things maybe your organizations are considering, and I won't read this list to you, but there's a lot of ways to respond to what's happening in the world and what's happening to your organization. There are things that are in your control and there are things that are not in your control. Most of these are things that people tend to look at in these kinds of times in terms of how to respond to the external environment. So obviously there are a lot of alternative actions to consider, and as I'm sure we all know, there is no magic bullet where only one of these things is the appropriate response. So the premise then of this is that there should be a logical process. We cannot just react without taking a moment and thinking about what is the appropriate response that we should exhibit. There's a lot of burning platforms out there. They're not that hard to find. It's obvious that we have to have some sort of response, and getting to a response quickly in today's environment especially is very, very critical. But just because you're doing something quick doesn't mean that you're doing the right thing. So one of the things that we consider is what's happening to our organization externally. So what is happening with our suppliers and with our competitors and with the economy? We have a process that we use to help you sort through all those different issues and interpret those issues to determine what is the appropriate response your organization ought to take. Another thing that the process that we employ helps is to focus you on what's the most relevant and the most significant opportunities. Obviously, organizations live in a very dynamic environment. There's no such thing that I've seen, at least, as a static business environment. So people are making improvements, changing things on a daily basis. What are the things now, based on the changes that you've experienced, that are most relevant to you, that have the most potential for helping relieve whatever concerns that situation is causing? And which of them are most important? Obviously, there's 1,000 things one could do. What's the most important things to do? Another advantage to our process-based approach is that for those of you who know KT or have been working with KT in the past, we're founded on basic thinking principles, rational processes for how problems are solved and how decisions are made and how projects are managed. Much of our diagnostic tools and analysis tools are founded in those rational thinking processes, helping us ask the right questions of the right person in an effective and an efficient manner so that we don't waste a lot of time talking about information that doesn't have relevance or doesn't have significance. A fourth point around that is that we make the thinking visible, and not just our thinking to you, but your thinking to you, and we engage with the client to make sure that there's buy-in. It's not a consulting firm, and we are not an organization, and this is not a process that comes in, spits out a white paper, tells you all the things that are broken in your business, and then hands it off to you and says, good luck with that. We are very much an engaged participant in terms of helping you figure out the most appropriate responses to the situations you're faced with that have identified savings opportunities and can be achieved. So we don't create pie-in-the-sky type of projections. We make sure we have quantifiable, agreed data and information that helps you make better decisions about what to do. The overview of the 5 phases, essentially, and this is a cradle-to-grave approach, obviously, and the focus of this presentation will be on the first 2 phases. There is a scoping phase, which is essentially just trying to get an understanding of where you are today from a holistic perspective. That drives the diagnostic and what we analyze and where we go looking for opportunities. Oftentimes that diagnosis tells us about the problem and the size of the problems and the opportunities that you've got out there. We'll identify some quick wins, but some of the more complex and the broader issues in the organization require some design work. So there's a 3rd phase there that says we're going to design the proper solutions to the opportunities we've identified in the diagnostic phase. Once those solutions are designed, certainly there is implementation work to be done. And then ultimately, again, at a very holistic level, is how do I take this initial implementation of improvements and spread it throughout the organization, and in many cases change the culture of the organization. So there are 5 phases. This presentation is meant to focus primarily on the first 2, scoping and diagnostic. One note to keep in mind is this presentation has a slight bias towards manufacturing operations that are trying to cut costs. I will admit that bias up front. But the process itself applies across industries. It applies across different business conditions. I'm certain there are industries where cost cutting is not their primary focus. An article this morning about a company here in the States that makes wind turbine blades is in the opposite situation. So it doesn't make the use or the validity or the benefit of using a process any less valid. Which is the reason why I've invited some of my colleagues to join me during Q&A, is you will admittedly get a sense that this is aimed primarily at operations in a manufacturing environment. That is just one example to be able to illustrate that the type of process and the type of tools that we use. My colleagues at the end will be able to answer any questions regarding how this might apply to your specific situation. In terms of the scoping phase, again, we need to understand the current situation and decide where to go look based on what's happening to you and around you within the organization for where opportunities might be available. And at the end of this scoping phase, essentially what we've got is a very specific diagnostic plan for what we're going to go do in order to get to the root of the issues you're facing. It's to make sure that is meaningful. And one of the things that I've seen in my years in doing this is that a lot of consulting firms can do this. A lot of consulting firms can bring a team of consultants into your operation or into your organization and begin doing a large number of studies and produce a very nice-looking report with lots of graphs and lots of white papers. And oftentimes, a lot of that information just isn't relevant. So we want to make sure in the scoping phase that, first of all, we get a sense for how your organization works, get a sense, at least anecdotally, for where those opportunities exist. But the cornerstone of that scoping phase is an executive alignment session. And that alignment session is intended to understand from a strategic perspective who your organization is and who it has to become, given some of the external variables that influence how you react to the world. And so out of the scoping phase, we'll agree the greatest need, we'll agree what the organization feels the best response to that need is, and then we'll also agree what needs to be investigated further in order to understand how to generate and affect that best response. And the foundation of that executive alignment session is something that we have created. Actually, Alan Braish, who has authored a book, How Organizations Work, is use the enterprise model in that book to start to essentially use it as a lens through which to view the world, if you will. And if you look at the graphic on your screen right now, the box in the center represents you, the business. And most of the things, if not all of the things within that box, are more or less within your control. And it's the things in yellow, the boxes in yellow surrounding the business, that the executive alignment session attempts to understand. Is we need, and you need, more importantly, to understand what do you expect and what are the assumptions you're making about each of those boxes. What's going to happen to the market? What are those assumptions going to do to your customers, and how will they behave? What kinds of issues or concerns are you experiencing in terms of your raw material or your suppliers? What are your competitors doing to differentiate themselves? Understanding all of those things, in some cases making assumptions because we are in some ways predicting the future, is important to be able to guide us towards which of the things inside the business box do we need to focus most on. And in some organizations, in every organization, it differs. So for example, do I need to reformulate my strategy and start there? Are there some key value streams or business processes that are going to be more important than others to optimize based on the assumptions I'm making about the future and what's going to happen external to me? Do I have capabilities that lack in the organization, or do I not have an organization structure that supports those business processes? And we use this model to make sure that the senior management team, if they haven't already given this some robust thought, is going to focus their improvement efforts and their responses on the things that are most likely to help them respond effectively to the external environment that surrounds them. So this session typically is 1 to 2 days, and the output of it yields us a very clear picture as to where now within the organization do we need to go do further diagnostics. And if you'll notice, I've estimated some durations. It's difficult to do that. I know I'm sounding like a consultant now, but really the duration and how much of which of these phases depends very much on your organization and situation that you find yourself in. I tried to give you at least a broad sense for the timing and the duration. So a scoping event typically is 1 to 3 days. I've been on some that have been only 1. I've been on others that have lasted a bit longer, but it's a relatively short period of time. It's intended to make sure that we just go use our resources and our time and your resources and time effectively in the diagnostic, which is phase 2. So the diagnostic, what we're trying to do is determine the current performance, and by assess, we're talking as quantifiably and data-driven as we can. Based on that current performance, what areas of opportunity can we identify, and which of them are more important to capture than others? How big are those opportunities? And also identify quick wins. This is not meant to supplement the ongoing efforts that are driving in the proper direction and replace those. And by quick wins, we may mean improvement efforts already underway. Other types of quick wins, though that's a bit of a misnomer, are some of the temporary measures that organizations put in place. You can't pick up the paper today without reading about organizations that are making wage cutbacks or cutting hours or going to flexible work shifts. So we understand, again, that we're living in a dynamic environment, and we incorporate whatever things are going on that are moving in the same direction into those plans. The next slide, I hope you're not frightened by large volumes of words in a slide coming up. But essentially, the diagnostic phase is intended to do a couple of things. We want to validate internal assumptions. And a lot of organizations have sacred cows and have been living under assumptions rather than data for a long, long time. And one of the things we find in these diagnostic events is that we are often able to concretely confirm that, yes, this is in fact the case with data and with observations and with studies. But oftentimes, we're able to help organizations come from a different perspective because we've been able to prove that what they thought was happening wasn't really. So it's good to know what you know. It's also good to know what you don't know, and that's one of the emphasis of a diagnostic activity is to validate or invalidate assumptions. Oftentimes, because of our foundation in our thinking skills and our problem solving and decision making, we ask questions that once they've been asked and answered, people say, well, why didn't I ask that question? We ask a lot of questions that provide new information and new perspectives for an organization to consider in terms of how they respond to the environment. And the last piece of the diagnostic is obviously we've got to be able to say, and here's what you do about it. So it's not enough to beat ourselves up that all of these problems exist and that all of these opportunities have remained uncaptured. We've also got to talk about how big are they and what can be done in order to go capture those opportunities. And so, again, this is very much oriented towards a cost-cutting mentality, and this is certainly not an entire list of what we could do, nor is it an entire list of what we would do. In other words, based on what is most appropriate to diagnose, these are the kinds of things that you might see us doing during a diagnostic activity in the first week or the first portion of that diagnosis, assuming that it is a longer diagnosis. So again, many of those studies, there's 1,000 consulting firms in the world that can do a ratio delay study. There's 1,000 that can do value stream mapping. It's important to know that I'm using the right tool in the right place, and I believe our process helps us confirm that we are. And also, you could give me all the tools that a brain surgeon requires, but you probably would not want me to operate on you. And so a lot of these tools are used more effectively as the result of the way that we approach diagnosis and problem solving and problem prevention. So the first phase of that diagnosis then is just aimed at making sure we understand what it is we're working with and to start thinking about and identifying where to go look for those opportunities. The next phase then, and again, this is more towards the manufacturing. We can talk in Q&A if you're interested about what it might look like in other industries and other situations. But these are the places in the manufacturing environment in particular we typically find room for improvement. So again, it's not a lot of surprise here for those of you that have been through these diagnoses before. But are we looking at eliminating waste? Are we looking at improving work methods? Are we looking at the way we schedule? In many cases, it is some basic supervisory skills that are required, or a better understanding of the day-to-day operations in a supervisory position to be able to identify when things are going wrong so that rework doesn't happen and lost time doesn't happen and all the other smaller, frequent sources of waste in an organization. But oftentimes, these are the areas in which we will find those opportunities and start to develop an idea as to what's going to be required to go get those opportunities, to take advantage of them. And finally, again, oftentimes, particularly when the magnitude of the change required or the complexity of the change required is such, we oftentimes find a need to design a proper solution. So, for example, one of the early results that I listed was we reduced an organization's cycle time from 6 weeks, or lead time, I should say, from 6 weeks down to 1 week. We didn't do that by drawing it on the back of the napkin. There was a great deal of solution design work required to be able to plan for what we wanted it to look like in its future state, understand the cost and the resources and the time required in order to make that change and affect that change. And also, solution design takes into account that the activities resulting from a diagnosis will not be operating in a vacuum. There are other things going on within the organization, and we need to understand where those new initiatives are placed within the organization's portfolio of initiatives and projects that are going on. So the design phase tries to accomplish that. Finally, assuming that you've got a proper design that you're ready to go implement, we help organizations all the time with effectively making those implementations. And the sort of cliche that I use is, if it was as simple as issuing a memo and on Monday we start acting and behaving this way, you'd have done it by now. And we know that there's much more to making changes of such magnitude in an effective way. So we look at those improvements and implement them. We work with the organization to give it more of a continuous improvement feel. We develop people's capabilities because conditions will continue to change. And one of our premises is that we want people to be able to do some of the things that we do in an effective manner. So we will transfer that capability to you so that as conditions change, it's a matter of being able to help yourselves. And finally, we will also track and document the results that those improvements achieve so that you understand what you got for what you spent, both internal and external costs. Finally, and I do see that I have a question. I'm not ignoring that. There's somebody who has texted me a question that I will respond to in just 1 second. If you permit. The last phase then is transformation. Is once you've done that initial list of things that are most important to improve, where can I look within the organization in order to leverage those improvements elsewhere, and again, installing that continuous improvement mentality, and in some cases, building upon more advanced things on the solutions already implemented. That is gist of my presentation. So again, I realize it is a relatively large amount of information in a relatively short period of time. One of the things, before I open it up to questions, I wanted to make sure that everybody had access to some contact information. So bear with me for a second, a few names. There is my contact information. I'm located in the United States. Actually, most of the time these days I've been in South America and Brazil, but my North American number works. Rather than give you 3 or 4 different people's information with respect to the various practices within KT, what we've chosen to do is give you a colleague of mine. Her name is Jen Mullins, and she is happy to direct you if you have questions or wish to speak with somebody further to the appropriate person. So I've given you her contact information as well. And as I open this up to questions and answers, I'm going to also bring onto the line 3 of my colleagues. Michael Curran-Hayes is a partner and a VP of Global General Enterprise. That is not General Electric. We're confused. Drew Marshall is also a partner, and he's our Chief Innovation Officer and comes from the tech world, so we will respond to any technical technology industry type questions. And Martin Wing, who is also a partner, is our Vice President of Global Consumer Product Practice. So with that, I will open it up and turn it over to Drew Marshall, who will moderate.
Thanks very much, Brian. The first question we have is from Michael, and Michael is asking a question for clarification around current performance is based on what? Notes that he has no way to benchmark with their competitors other than anecdotal, and from that input he feels they're superior. But how is he going to justify an investment in improving when he doesn't have verified access to competitive data? So,
that is directed.
yeah,
Sorry?
and it's not directed to any particular person, but if we could, Brian, if you want to weigh in on that first, and then we'll tee up one of the other practice representatives.
There is no simple answer to that question. Again, some industries in general are more open than others. The best way that we found in the absence of external data is to use what we call best demonstrated performance. And that's dealing particularly with variability of performance. So one of the things that we oftentimes take a look at is, what's the best you organization has ever done? And if you can achieve that level of performance at times, what is it that can be done to bring up the times where you're not achieving that level of performance to that same level? Again, if you have comparable information in other industries, that would certainly be another piece of data for comparison. But oftentimes, as you said, Michael, you just don't have that. So if every day could be as good as your best day, essentially, is the premise here, what would that look like, and what would that mean to you?
Right. Thanks, Brian. We have another question from Dawn. Dawn's asking that we please share some of the questions that we might use for to provide a new perspective on the diagnostic stage. So what makes our approach to diagnosis different and more compelling?
We'll take that one as well, if that's okay. I'll give you a very good example. We were doing some work with a printing operation, a newspaper, as a matter of fact. And as I mentioned in the diagnosis section, a lot of people run on assumptions, and their assumption was that web breaks were due to a particular reason. And so they spent a lot of time and a lot of improvement energy trying to get rid of what they assumed to be the root cause of web breaks. And so when we talk about, and when I mentioned that we use relatively common diagnostic tools in a different way, in that particular instance, what we had to do was take a look at the variance in some new and different ways. In other words, there were different teams of press operators doing different kinds of press runs on different presses. And so one of the assumptions was that the number of different runs in a shift either added to or detracted from the number of web breaks. And web breaks, by the way, is just the way they choose to quantify waste. There's a great degree of waste when you have to restart a press, if you're unfamiliar. What we found was that there were a lot of shifts with a lot of teams on different presses where they had a lot of changeovers and had fewer web breaks. So one of the things we disproved was not all web breaks are attributable to this particular cause. And there was about 3 or 4 of those similar type things that allowed us to just change their perceptions and get them to look at all the different things that contribute to web breaks. In the end, what the improvement initiative looked like was that it was difficult to pin anything down more than the commonality of the team and how it's set up for the day. In other words, certain teams did certain runs on certain presses very, very well. Other teams doing the same run on the same press in a different shift did it poorly. And so what we ended up doing was an effort we titled One Best Way, which was there's one way and one way only for each particular situation to respond. That's just one example of the kinds of things we bring to an organization. Not that they weren't focused on it, not that they didn't find it important, they just needed a new perspective.
Great, Brian, thanks. And Brian's focus in that particular example was primarily in the area of manufacturing excellence and operational excellence. Another way that KT approaches the organizations is through a service excellence mindset, and particularly the framework that we use in terms of diagnosis is helping our clients from a service strategy perspective achieve a clear understanding of customer lifetime value. We see there are 2 drivers in promoting customer lifetime value. One is increasing service performance in the area of revenue performance, turning the service function itself from being a cost center into a profit center. And the other is reducing the cost of service overall. Primarily, most of the efforts that we've seen in the marketplace in terms of improving service performance are in the area of cost control. And what we've decided is that the only way you can achieve breakthrough performance in terms of your service strategy is actually to address both. So increase the service revenue and reducing the service cost. And on the revenue side, all of the drivers that we see there are around process effectiveness, people effectiveness, and organizational effectiveness and alignment. So we see that there are a whole series of levers around which we ask a staged set of diagnostic questions that help us get to the heart of the service quality, the overall quality of the service experience, and the speed of resolution, which has a critical impact on customer satisfaction, and also has an impact on service pricing. So with that in mind, let's see if we can open it up to a few other questions. We'll open it up to live questions while people are getting ready to answer their questions. So Lauren, if you could please open it up to participant questions. We'll answer the next question from Ed. Ed's saying that traditional approaches are focused on supply chain, inventory management, and machine process improvement, etc. How much emphasis does Kepner-Trigo place on labor availability, capacity, and performance? In other words, overall labor effectiveness. Brian, is that something you could weigh on?
I can, and unfortunately the answer is it depends. Again, there are factors that make that more or less important for your organization. In the organizations that are labor intensive, in other words, that don't have a high degree of automation, we spend a great deal of time, and not necessarily in anything more complex than making supervisors supervise, for lack of a better term. In other words, a very simple thing that, and this comes from my background 20 years ago, is how often does everybody who's supposed to be clocked in for a shift, are they at their workstations on time? And how often do they start slowly pacing themselves at the end of the day? So there are some sort of industrial engineering type things that we can do if it's needed. But oftentimes it's also the elimination of waste from a lean perspective. I'm speaking purely from a lean perspective here, is in making a lot of the wasteful activity that isn't obvious, doesn't get reported on any lost time or downtime reports, focusing and transferring the capability to the people out on the floor to be able to identify and eliminate that waste has the same impact. So again, I hate to give such a vague answer without knowing any of the more specifics. But if equipment uptime is important to you, we'll focus on the equipment. If the availability and the use of your people's time is important, we will focus on your people.
And to that point, Brian, I think the point of entry, there's a particular issue that we work with a client on first, may not be the first and last place we work with a client. We might start with asset performance and then end up with performance system performance across a line or a plant.
That's correct. That's correct.
Mags has provided additional support around your response to Dawn's question. Dawn was asking us about our perspective on the diagnostic stage, and Mags has said that the KT way is not being afraid to ask the most obvious questions that you would normally not ask as you assume you know the answer. Making the question visible and making the answer visible often helps resolve the seemingly complex issue. Thank you very much, Matt. I couldn't agree more. Are there any other questions from people either online via phone or people who would like to type in a question and receive a response?
Ladies and gentlemen, if you wish to ask a question, please press *1 and clearly record your name followed by #. If your audio question has been answered or you wish to withdraw your question, press *2.
Thanks, Lauren.
There are currently no audio questions.
All right, I've got another question here. This question is regarding the diagnosis period again, Brian. Mm-hmm. And it's stating that why is the diagnosis period projected to be 1 to 4 weeks? What's the reason for the wide range that we're citing?
The reason for the wide range is the wide range of needs. And to give you an example of a more complex diagnosis we've done, I had an organization about this time last year who had a couple of things happening to it, all of which required a variety of analyses to be done. They were in a market where they made two products, one of which the market was declining, the other of which the market was relatively new to the world and increasing. So one of the things they wanted to understand is how can my organization respond to both of these conditions. They had plants scattered around the world that in most cases made a lot of the same products, so they wanted to understand the variation and had different quality levels. So they wanted to understand how to reduce the variation of the quality so that, because as they started to look at how to serve the new market in a global environment, they needed to be able to potentially distribute the manufacturing differently across their footprint. And additionally, the third driving need for that was the need to understand where can I just in general drive costs out of the business, particularly in the declining market as it became more and more commoditized. So given those compelling business needs, and this all came as a result of a reformulation of their strategy that we helped them with, our diagnosis actually lasted about 6 weeks, to be honest with you, because there was a lot of places to go, and it was important to have consistency of the people doing the diagnosis, which is because otherwise we could have done some simultaneously. But also there was just a lot of information that needed to be analyzed that had no analysis done on it. So, for example, is which products in which families are going to be declining most rapidly, and which ones could be made for a lower cost. So we had to do some complexity reduction type analysis. We had to do some operational diagnosis. We had to do some simulation from a manufacturing footprint perspective, and that frankly takes a great deal of time, and not just KT consultant time, but also the organization's time.
Great, thanks, Brian.
You're welcome.
Rudy is asking the question generally: how does the KT method differ from the popular Six Sigma method, especially as this applies to validation through data? So, what makes us different and unique and special with regard to Six Sigma?
That to me as well.
Yes, Brian. I think you're on a roll, mister.
I guess I am. The answer to your question is that it is we employ a great deal of Six Sigma type tools in our diagnosis. So one thing it's important to point out is that it is not an either or choice. It is not KT diagnostic tools or Six Sigma diagnostics. In many cases, we use those diagnostic tools that you have been taught and your black belts and your green belts already know. What I believe differentiates us is that our problem solving and decision making and preventive problem prevention processes give us a more structured, logical way to ask the questions that the Six Sigma tools can more effectively answer than most other tools out there. In other words, when we look at variation reduction, which is the primary intent, obviously, of Six Sigma, we understand that there are tools that are better statistically than some of the questions that we have individually within our problem analysis process. But we also believe that the problem analysis process guides how we ask the questions, what questions we ask, the order in which we ask them, and the information we go gather via Six Sigma tools, if I'm being clear, hopefully.
Great, thanks. This question is a question that's actually a pretty broad question for the practice representatives online. And it's one of the most pressing issues you see in clients at this time, given the global economic turmoil we're all experiencing. And I think what I might suggest is that we actually go through each of the practice areas, and we'll start with Martin Wing first. And Martin, if you can come online and just describe some of the things you're seeing in product spaces today.
Thanks, Drew. In terms of the consumer product space, what we're actually seeing is that there is a big move to the value end of the market. So in terms of consumer spending, of course, we're actually seeing that people are not spending as much in terms of the premium brands. And what that actually does, of course, is put a lot of pressure on those premium brands in terms of the profit that they're able to bring in from the volume that they're doing. So that's certainly one area where we're seeing a lot of work. I was talking to one of our clients a few weeks ago about the bottled water market, and of course how that has actually fallen through the floor because there's a much more convenient source of water, and that is in the tap. I think people are certainly looking towards the value end if you're actually looking at the consumer products market. The implication of that when you're actually looking at operational efficiency, of course, is dealing with those fluctuating volumes. Going back to the point that Andrew made in the opening presentation, you've got a large structural cost base there which is actually in place to put out some of the products that you're manufacturing, but if that particular range is completely dropped off the end and there's not much of a forecast for it, to actually re-engineer the business to deal with that is not a small issue. So I think that's one of the primary things that we're actually seeing in the consumer market.
Great, thanks, Martin. Michael Curran-Hayes, you're still online. Give us a snapshot of the key issues that you're seeing in the life sciences space.
Hey, Drew, I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Great. Yeah, no problem. A lot of what I'm seeing is the same as what Martin talked about. In life science, they're beginning to see pressure on costs due to governmental regulations, so we're starting to see lots of people move into the operational excellence sphere, kind of what Brian's been talking about. Six Sigma is a big driver in the industry right now, as well as Lean is taking over, and we've got this combination called Lean Sigma. So there's a lot of work trying to reduce variation, find root causes and product issues, make sure things are getting out the door. And especially in the United States, with the pressure on the FDA now with all the issues we've had, there's a lot of regulatory compliance issues that we're beginning to see impact us as that unfolds. And I suspect with the change in the administration here in the U.S. and some of the other governmental changes that are happening in the European market, that we're going to see more regulatory issues impacting that industry.
Great. Thanks, Michael. As for the service sector, the one thing that we're seeing in the technical support, field service operations in the arena, the big driver at the moment is retention, customer lifetime value. How can our clients hold on to the customers that they have, given that the economic pressure to turn off service agreements, to mothball hardware, to shut down software licenses, coming about due to a need for a lower level of capacity in their clients' operations. So customer lifetime value is a critical driver in our work at the moment. Brian, in the industrial product space, what's the biggest driver that you're seeing in clients in terms of the most pressing needs?
There's really two, both influenced by what's happening today. One is asset utilization, which is nothing new for those of you who work in primarily manufacturing industries. So machine uptime, how we do our maintenance, is squeezing every penny out of every asset that we've got in the building as demand either drops or changes. The other one is project management effectiveness, I guess I would call it, is you are starting to, because of whether it's reductions in force or the aging workforce, starting to see seasoned project managers leave. Your resources are getting pinched, yet you're still trying to accomplish, in many cases, relatively large projects. So, whether it's capital asset being installed or major efforts around the organization to make improvements, is how do I make sure that the projects that I want to get done effectively on time, on budget, and on quality.
Great. Thanks, Brian. John has asked us a question online. He would like us to share how we ensure that a client is capable of supporting the change after the engagement is finished. Essentially, how do we avoid backsliding on the client's part? Martin, I think, given your experience with the performance system, it's probably something I'd like you to answer.
Sorry, Drew, could you repeat the question, please?
Yes, yeah. The question was, John is asking us to share how we ensure that a client is capable of supporting the change after the engagement is completed. So KT's done its job, the client's now responsible for the result. How does the client avoid backsliding in past performance behavior?
Okay, sorry, thank you. We see that there are 4 key elements there in terms of ensuring that any change in behavior that we're looking for from people is actually sustained. Of course, you've got the skills transfer piece on its own in terms of new behaviors or skill sets that people are going to need with the new tools that they're actually going to be applying. The second element is ensuring that there's actually a good deal of coaching that is available for those people as they're actually trying to exhibit those new behaviors and achieve the goals that they're being set. Those two alone, of course, are not going to be enough. There's a deal of process alignment which is required in terms of business process alignment to the new skills, and people who are doing that coaching actually being allowed to provide that sort of feedback on a timely basis as people are actually doing the job that's being asked of them. And the fourth element is what we see as performance system alignment. So that's actually making sure situation parameters are set up correctly in terms of expectations and triggers and workflow and priorities and the environment in which people work, as well as, of course, the feedbacks and the rewards and recognition that they actually get. So it's important that we align all of those elements in order to sustain the change. It's not just a case of transferring some sort of capability and then walking away. There's got to be a good deal of work that's done in what we call an implementation plan, where all of those things are going to be identified to actually sustain the changes that we're looking to achieve.
Thanks very much, Martin. Eddie is asking, is the cost of the analysis related to the results? Eddie's wondering if we're tying the diagnosis to the results from the outset. The answer to that question is we can tie the diagnosis to the results if we're also brought in to work on the performance in terms of improving the performance in a subsequent engagement after the diagnosis. If we diagnose and then we're not able or we're not engaged to actually offer any support, then we really can't tie the diagnosis cost to the results because we have no measure of control over them. And that's one of the keys in terms of the diagnosis, that we're looking at diagnostics at the moment to make sure that our clients are focused on the right things at this stage. And we're finding that's where the pressure is greatest. The competing priorities that our clients are facing are astronomical. We have another question. This question is from somebody. If I'm interested in having someone from KT initiate a scoping service at my facility, what are the logical next steps from follow immediately after the conclusion of this webinar? I'll leave that one to you, Michael. What do you suggest somebody do if they're interested in having someone from KT initiating a scoping service or a diagnostic?
I would suggest that the contact person to follow up with is Jennifer Mullins. She'll be the main point of contact. You can give her a call there. The number is easily displayed. She'll pass that person's name out to the appropriate practice leader, and Martin and I or somebody else will be in touch with them either today or first thing tomorrow morning, depending on when they get in touch with us.
Very good. Thanks.
And I want to thank the KT person who threw that one out.
Yes, I've got a series of anonymous questions popping up here, so we'll get through the rest. Here's another one. This one is: does KT have any kind of common issues that are commonly badly done in the market? So are we seeing things that companies are doing and doing poorly across the market? And if so, how do we see that they're usually being resolved? Are we seeing any patterns? This would be an open question to any of the practice leaders online.
I would say there is a general weakness in the ability of organizations to manage their portfolio of projects. And I realize it's a very generic statement, but generally speaking, most organizations bite off more than they can chew and are too either proud or uninformed about the fact they've done that to admit it.
So it's essentially, Brian, on the project management side, you're seeing a capacity issue?
That's from a is there a pattern? Yes. They either overpromise or overextend themselves to the detriment of everything. In other words, they don't always focus on the most important projects first. They tend to sometimes place either equal emphasis across the portfolio, which means that they all get done in a mediocre fashion. But again, it's not so much that they can't manage individual projects in a common. I mean, there are certainly organizations that have that problem, but the most common one I see is that they aren't aware of everything that they are attempting to do and the impact of doing all of it in a mediocre fashion.
Okay, and I guess this particular questioner was asking, and how are they usually resolving this particular issue? they recognize that they've got an issue of project proliferation, how are they managing that proliferation after the fact once they've recognized that they've got a need?
Typically, I'll see them do one of two things. One is they will demand of their people that they now work 18-hour days instead of 16-hour days and get it all done anyway. Or they will do other things. They may accept mediocrity. In other words, a project completed no matter to the degree to which the quality was there is okay, or they will, in some cases, follow the 80-20 rule. They'll get about 80% of what they wanted to get out of the project and then slough off the other 20% to focus on something more important.
Okay. Good, thanks. What other questions do we have?
One last thing I did mean to add is that for the folks that have been on the call, and even the ones that have dropped off, will be getting a link to a recording of this WebEx. They will be getting a copy of the slide deck that was presented, and I believe potentially one other small piece of marketing collateral that I'm not remembering what it was. But I just want to let people know that sometime mid to late next week they should be getting some follow-up material. So if you're interested in these slides, they will be forthcoming.
Very good, thank you. What other questions do you have in the
All right.
Okay.
Well, thank you all very much for taking time out of what I'm sure is a very busy day. For some of you here in North America, you're getting into lunchtime, so we appreciate you hanging around. As we said, Jennifer Mullins is the contact, so please, if you would like to reach out and speak with somebody about your particular situation and particular industry, please get a hold of us. Thank you very much.
And thank you for your participation in today's conference. This concludes the presentation, and you may now disconnect. Good day.